Just a bit about Bluesky. So, Bluesky International is a leading provider of aerial survey and geospatial data products. We're headquartered in Ashby-de-la-Zouch in England, quite near Leicester and Birmingham, between Leicester and Birmingham. We're privately owned and we're established in 2003. We've got approximately 100 staff across 4 locations. So there's about 25 of us in Ashby. There's some over in Republic of Ireland, some in Northern Ireland. We have a couple of officers out in India that do a lot of our production work. And we have about 15 staff over in our US office, which is actually in Western Massachusetts in a place called Williamstown. So we've been growing steadily across the last 20 years or so. As I say, we're completely privately owned, so we haven't had any external investment. It's all organic growth. We've got a really proud history serving both the public sector and the private sector, actually, and UK academia. So we've got history in all of those sectors. We're particularly proud of our work we've done with UK central government and local government. We are the supplier of choice for aerial photography and terrain data sets for the UK public sector. So we have a contract with the Geospatial Commission that's now sits under DSIT, previously the Cabinet Office, where we provide our ortho-rectified vertical aerial photography and our terrain data sets to all public sector organisations. That's right from central government organisations like the Forestry Commission, Environment Agency, English Nature, and then right down to local government, which will cover, which will cover county councils, city councils, districts, boroughs, and then police forces, national parks, right down to parish councils. So all of those organisations are using our aerial photography and terrain data sets. But we also provide those into a whole range of different vertical markets, including the environment sector, renewables, insurance, utilities, you name it. There's a huge amount of applications for those, what we would call our standard core products. But what we're here to talk about today is our national tree map product, which has been around for over 10 years now, and is also very broadly used across both the public and private sector for all sorts of different applications. So the national tree map itself, essentially what the tree map is a map of tree canopy and trees over 3 meters in height, covering the whole of Great Britain and Republic of Ireland. It has 3 core attributes, which is the location of the tree, the height of the tree, and also a canopy measurement, the size of the canopy in square meters. The tree map came about really as a result of work initially we were doing with the insurance sector. So you may or may not know that there's a large part of insurance peril claims which are related to subsidence, so tree root subsidence for buildings. And we were approached to map trees using a completely manual method, using our aerial photography with guys sitting at computer screens with 3D glasses on, manually digitizing tree canopies next to buildings. And that was, as it says here, back in 2011. We created that data set fairly rapidly, but that really catalyzed our ideas around, actually, we could do this nationally. We could be the first organization to accurately map tree canopy across the whole country. So we set to task with our R&D team and our research team, trying to work out the best possible methodologies, the best possible way of mapping trees and tree canopy across the whole country. As you'd expect from any sort of product development like this, it went through a number of different iterations. We used another number of different techniques, input data, software packages, and eventually we settled on a process using quite complex algorithms, using a range of our data sets to create a tree canopy map. Now, initially, we were a little over ambitious. We started calling it a tree data set. So we initially started saying to people, we've mapped all trees in the country using this methodology, whereas in fact that was a bit ambitious. It became obvious to us fairly rapidly that what we were actually doing is creating an accurate or fairly accurate tree canopy map rather than an accurate tree map that actually maps every single tree in the country. So just to explain that a little bit further, The National Tree Map does a great job of mapping tree canopies where there are individual trees for in urban areas, for example, because there's a great contrast between the built environment and the vegetated areas. However, in more rural areas where you get stands of trees in woodlands or forested areas, especially managed woodlands or managed forests where you've got homogeneous groups of trees, it finds it very difficult to identify all individual trees. And of course, because we're mapping this data using remotely sensed aerial products, we can't see trees underneath other trees. So where you've got an area of forest, if there are trees underneath other trees, we can't identify those trees. So how we like to market the National Tree Map is really as a tree canopy database that also does a great job of identifying individual trees in urban areas. The product itself is generated using 5 key core-based products. So that's our vertical ortho-rectified aerial photography, our national terrain model, our digital terrain model, our digital surface model, our colour infrared, our national colour infrared layer, and also some open data, some vector open data of the built environment as well, which we use for filtering. So put that in context, as an organisation, we actually capture vertical aerial photography and also those terrain data sets of the whole of Great Britain and Ireland on a 3-year update programme. So we're updating this National Tree Map on that same cycle. Every 3 years, we create a brand new National Tree Map database that sits in synergy with our update programme of the base data sets as well. The data set in isolation is a range of vector formats. So it's usually delivered as an Esri shapefile, but we can deliver in other vector formats as well. 3 layers. There's a canopy database, an idealized canopy database, which is just circular canopies, which you can see, on this previous slide. I'm not sure if you can see that, but it's underneath. What I can see is the pictures. So it's just a circular canopy above the tree, and then there's a height point or a single point for every tree location as well. So, like with any product, it took us a little while to establish the product in the various markets, and it was a relatively slow start. But actually, the National Tree Map got adopted quite quickly after that slow start. So in about 2014, 2015, we started to see a significant amount of interest in the adoption of the National Tree Map, and we were the way we commercialize this data set was to provide annual licenses of the data that then provided our customers with ongoing updates of these data sets. So as I alluded to earlier, initially it was very focused around the insurance industry, but it soon became very apparent that we're looking at lots of different industries outside of that. So you can see here, forestry is an obvious one, land and estate management, agriculture, utilities. Utilities is another really important one for overhead power lines. So we had a lot of interest from some of the big distribution network operators that were taking our National Tree Map to map what they call the encroachment of vegetation on overhead power lines. So there's a lot of issues, I'm sure you know, and Ofgem are all over this, about when we have storms in this country, tree fall very much affects our overhead power line network. So mapping and managing where those trees are around the overhead power line network was a huge application for the National Tree Map initially. More recently, we've seen a lot of use in the environment sector and renewables, things like, and I'll move on to this a little bit later, things like looking at carbon credits, carbon capture, carbon sequestration, which has become a really key topic more broadly as well. So that's a really interesting area. Lots of use around risk. So this isn't just insurance based, but risk for local authorities, for example. So knowing where their tree assets would pose a risk to the general public. obviously for them that's a key issue around if there's trees which they are on council owned land and they are diseased or they're old and they need pruning, for example, or they need felling. They need to know where those trees are, their large trees are. And you might be very surprised at how little lots of local authorities actually know about the location of their trees, the size of their trees, where those risks actually lie. So broadly, a really impressive adoption of the National Tree Map, and that continues to grow. We've also seen UK academia, universities quite regularly licensing the National Tree Map for lots and lots of different research projects, also for use in teaching. We have regular customers, university customers, that have licensed the tree map on an ongoing basis, and they've done some really, really interesting projects. One that I can particularly think of was one looking at pollen, using the tree map to look at how pollen affects hay fever sufferers, and that was down in the southwest of the country. I think that was Exeter University were looking at that. A really, really interesting project that they did with the Met Office. So things like that, we love to hear of new applications of the tree map and exciting applications. So we're really hoping our offering of the National Tree Map through ADINA and Digimap is going to provide us with lots more opportunities to work with academia and see some of these new applications popping up. So on the whole, the National Tree Map is still the most consistent, complete tree data set of the Great Britain and Republic of Ireland. There are various other products out there that are more localized or provide a more generalized tree canopy offering, but we're very confident that the National Tree Map is certainly still the de facto standard for national tree canopy data in certainly Great Britain and Republic of Ireland. One thing I just wanted to mention, and this presentation is something I actually did at the GeoBusiness conference earlier. Earlier this year, I think it was. And the idea around it was to try and tie the National Tree Map to the broader sustainability and environment story that we're all gripped with at the moment. Trees are huge on the agenda at the moment. Both here in the UK, but also overseas. We've even got President Biden talking about trees over in the US, which represents a pretty new thing for the United States, who have previously not looked at trees in the light of dynamic assets that need to be managed in the way we look at them over here. But trees are fully on the agenda now for all sorts of reasons. Lots of you will know that actually trees in cities, urban greening are huge issues on the agenda. Central government legislation is now in place to ensure that we increase overall tree canopy in our built-up areas, but also we manage trees in a far more coherent and efficient way. So that's obviously increased the adoption of the National Tree Map as a data set, which hugely benefits organisations that have to manage trees from all sorts of points of view. And just to build that into the sort of geospatial data agenda on the whole, what we're currently seeing is the growth of the use of geospatial data more broadly as well, and that's across government. But we still believe it's overlooked a fair amount. So we've got the Geospatial Commission now that sits in government that are responsible for ensuring that geospatial data is pushed up the agenda in terms of how useful it can be across a whole range of different applications, both from a policy and legislation, but also the delivery of that policy and legislation and how geospatial data should be at the heart of a lot of that policy and legislation delivery, but also the analysis piece. So that really is feeding into the whole AI machine learning agenda, looking at how we can use geospatial data to create insight across both our rural and urban settings, and that's a really key part of what Bluesky is doing now, but the whole geospatial data industry is doing. We're really seeing lots and lots of applications being unlocked with more intelligent use of geospatial data, and whether that's from aeroplanes, as we do, all of our data is collected from fixed wing aircraft, but whether that could be from drones or satellite as well. So pulling all of those data sources together to ensure we're meeting those challenges we've got. at the moment. And again, using NTM specifically for the support against climate change. So looking at tree canopy more holistically, how we can benchmark tree canopy across local, regional, national areas, and ensuring that we're growing tree canopy, ensuring that we're planting the right types of trees in the right locations, and generally increasing biodiversity. So we're hearing a lot more about biodiversity net gain at the moment, how our biodiversity has been suffering, and how we need to increase our focus around ensuring that our levels of biodiversity are properly managed. So that's, in a nutshell, the National Tree Map, how we create it, and some of the sort of broader applications and customers. I just want to run through a few of the more specific case studies, some of those organisations we've been working with over the past few years or so. The first one is with an organisation called Treeconomics. Some of you may have heard of Treeconomics. They are an organisation that have been around a number of years now, and they specifically look at how they mainly work with local authorities looking at the value of urban trees and how they can manage and protect urban trees and ensure that as an dynamic economic asset, urban trees are being maintained how they should be. They have got a number of local authority customers. This specific one was the London Borough of Islington. So they looked at their urban tree map and they looked at where their trees existed. They benchmarked that urban tree canopy, but they were specifically pulling in other factors like their flooding data, air pollution, socioeconomic factors across the London Borough, and looking at a tree planting opportunity map. So it's not only important where trees exist, but also important where trees don't exist. So where are there no trees? And that's something the tree map illustrates just as well as it does where trees are, it illustrates where trees aren't. And that's really, really important for local authorities when they're using this product to try and identify areas where they need to plant more trees. But more than that, they need to look at what types of trees they should be planting and also how those planted trees will affect the local area from a socioeconomic point of view. In addition to this, there's lots of studies that have previously been done and more recently been done looking at how tree canopy and urban greening affects people's health in general. We did a study with a health organisation, I think it was around Manchester, looking at how green areas actually improved people's both mental health but also physical health as well. Where there's green areas around, unsurprisingly, people want to walk more, they feel better within themselves, and that those studies are really informing where trees should be planted as well. Waterford Council in Republic of Ireland, so they've been a long-standing customer of ours using our auto-rectified aerial photography, but more recently they took our national tree map again to benchmark their urban canopy, their tree canopy across the whole of their county area, and that helps them to make decisions around again where they should be planting trees, benchmarking that tree canopy so they can measure the increase hopefully in tree canopy over the next number of years. They know they're going to get the national tree map updated over that period every 3 years, so they can map that tree canopy increase, and then it helps them budget as well around their whole management of urban spaces and urban green spaces. And on a slightly larger scale, the White Rose Forest, which actually covers something like 23,000 square kilometres around West Yorkshire, they were doing a similar thing. So they've taken the national tree map and benchmarked the national tree map and looked at specifically the carbon sequestration, the carbon capture with their trees across that area. This has actually happened in Red Rose Forest as well, which is their sort of partner organisation over in Lancashire, doing a very similar thing. So again, knowing where those trees are, knowing how they should be managing them, and getting an idea of the complete tree canopy coverage over a specific area. Something slightly different, organisation called Natural Capital Research, who are looking at specifically natural capital for landowners and all sorts of different organisations. So using a range of products, of which the National Tree Map is one, but also using our digital surface model amongst other satellite data sets, but looking at biodiversity baselines. Obviously, having that carbon capture has become a financial issue now for organisations, and a really important area for them to know what their biodiversity, but also their carbon sequestration, what carbon sequestration may occur on their land holdings. So the sort of models they're producing here, you can see, looking at mapping the trees across the land holdings, but also combining that tree mapping with satellite data, with existing land use data to create these detailed soil maps, topography maps alongside the National Tree Map, and then creating these output maps showing tree canopy derived from the National Tree Map, and then looking at carbon storage within those woodland areas and also outside of those woodland areas, and providing all of this data in detailed reports to landowners so they can have a detailed assessment of what their carbon is within their biodiversity. And then a slightly different approach, and this is really interesting application, is an organisation, a startup called Kita. So as I'm sure you'll know, big business are now planting lots of forests, both in the UK but also globally, for carbon offsetting. And these woodlands and these forests become financial assets that have been invested in. So as a financial asset, they need to be insured. So Kita have become the world's first specific carbon insurer, insuring these woodlands and forests as financial assets, and also tracking these assets to ensure that they remain how they're supposed to be. So you may have heard of these ghost forests, for example, that big business have been claiming they've planted, but they've either never been planted, or they've planted and not grown, or they've planted and been burned down. And they're still claiming they exist. Well, Kita are tracking those, and as an insurer, they have a responsibility to make sure they're properly managed as well. So really interesting application there, and this sort of thing is growing significantly. I'm sure Kita won't be the first organisation doing this. The last organisation doing this, but they were the first, and they've been looking at the National Tree Map and also some of the Bluesky's products to measure and map those forests. So what's next for the National Tree Map? Well, we've been working very hard for a number of years now, and you may have seen me smile a little bit there. It's because I've never presented the National Tree Map to any organisation without one question being asked, and it's always asked, which is, does the National Tree Map include species data? And the short answer to that is no, it doesn't, and I wish it did. But actually creating species attribution for the tree map is extremely complex, and to do it at scale would take a huge amount of expertise. However, we've made some significant progress on this using a range of different data sets. We're looking at using high point density LiDAR data to look at the structure of trees and segment and classify the trees based on that. We've been looking at hyperspectral data, both airborne and satellite hyperspectral data, to try and classify tree species. And we've made some progress, and we're actually working with a couple of academic institutions. So we're working with the University of Leicester, and we've also we've worked with, I'm trying to think how else, we've worked with another organisation, academic, we've done some work with Liverpool University as well, looking at trying to use these data sets. We've had an MPhil within Bluesky for the past 12 months, looking at doing a binary classification initially on coniferous and deciduous trees. But we're really aware that adding that additional attribute to the trees we have of species, or even the binary classification, or even picking out some specific species, would be hugely valuable to all sorts of different organisations. And just to put some context around that, for example, let's take the insurance industry in isolation for a second. Currently, the insurers love using the National Tree Map to assess their risk around subsidence, but what they'd love to be able to do is actually improve the levels of accuracy around that risk. So at the moment, they apply a general coefficient to the trees around how far the root structure would spread around a tree under a building. But of course, different species of tree will have a different level of root structure. So willow trees have got a huge root structure, for example. So if they knew the species, they'd be able to map that even more accurately. And from a policy point of view, they'd be able to get their book underwritten much more accurately if they had the species. Aside from that, we all know about ash dieback. We know the cost to UK government through ash dieback. I think I saw a figure of something vast, like 10 billion sterling, that ash dieback would probably cost UK government by 2030. These are huge figures, and knowing where all the ash trees in the country were would be massively beneficial to mitigating and managing the damage through ash dieback. So if we could identify all ash trees, that would be huge. But also outside of that, all sorts of ecological applications, knowing the species, risk around for local authorities, knowing the species is massively useful, but also things like climate, knowing species for climate change, all this sort of stuff. So we're very, very laser focused on trying to at least get some basic tree species in the National Tree Map. And that will hopefully happen in the next sort of 12 to 18 months. Well, I really hope it will. We'll sort of watch this space on that. So I think I've probably laid the point a little bit about the importance of trees and tree canopy. That won't be any surprise, I'm sure, but we genuinely believe that the National Tree Map is a unique data set. It's a data set that is already really widely used, broadly used, but we love to see new applications. We love to work with academic institutions that want to take the tree map, do research, provide value and insight into how the tree map can inform lots and lots of different areas. And we really hope as many of you as possible will take advantage of the fantastic pricing we've negotiated with Adina to take the National Tree Map through that vehicle. So thanks very much for listening, and I'm very happy indeed to take any questions anyone might have.